beside her, I am the better man. When I look to leave her, I always stagger back again.
Hello, fellas, and welcome to episode 1 of our new podcast. Hey, this is the announcement. DJ, we've been working on this one over a month.
Yeah, we just been kind of scheming up to it, I think.
And we haven't had a whole lot of time, all the other stuff we're doing, but this is the Rising Tide. The Rising Tide raises all ships, right?
Right.
And we have a special guest here in the house. We got Barrett from ATI Podcast.
Hey.
How's it going,
Hey.
man?
Good, man.
You're busy over there.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Sure am.
Glad to see it.
We've been doing really well. About 10 episodes in now. We just released one today that I was really excited about in particular. We had Storm Ruler on.
Yeah.
Those guys are on Napalm Records now, so they're getting ready to go out on a North American tour. So I had a chance to talk to Jason from Storm Ruler. Did our first live stream last night over Twitch, and then mixed it down and everything today and posted it up. So available everywhere.
That's what's up.
We're going to run some promos on that
Yeah.
at the first commercial break. We're going to talk about it all through this. So you guys definitely have to check that out. ATI Podcast available on a lot of stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, he's on everything.
So, Barrett, I would say me and your stories are somewhat similar, especially like when we're talking about the podcast thing.
Right, for sure.
Because the funny thing is 10 years ago, I
Yeah.
think, we both had different podcasts that were fans of each other and supported each other.
Right.
And then I don't know what happened to you guys and when you fell off or whatever.
Right.
But our podcast, just kind of burnt out, I guess, a little bit. We had a lot of
Pretty
fun
similar.
with it.
Yeah.
But then there was a 10 years break in between.
Right.
And we recently just started it up back in just podcasting in general. And you guys did the same thing.
Yeah, we sure did. And we had been talking about it. We teased it here and there with each other. And it was just, I had a kind of a creative void in my life right now. And I've always got to be doing something creatively, putting myself out there, expressing myself, or at least helping other people to have a platform. Any of that type of stuff is always in my wheelhouse. So I wasn't playing music right now. I reached out to my buddy I used to do the podcast with. He was interested in doing it, and just everything kind of came together. So
Was this during COVID times?
yeah, so we kind of started talking about doing it in the COVID times. We didn't actually start it till the beginning of this year. We just wanted to take a very adult approach with it this time.
Right.
Back in the day, we were in our early 20s.
Right.
And, it was kind of juvenile in some senses, but hey, it was a good time.
Right. I've mentioned this on other podcasts. If you would think of a world without very many podcasts, 10 years ago was like that.
Exactly.
It's in the household now. Everybody knows what a podcast is now, but back then you really didn't, especially any local ones. And I don't know of many other than ours and yours that was local at the time.
No, not in the area.
Well, you kind of just had a guy on Z1077 that was talking until every hit came on, and I was listening to The Breakfast Club when you can get past the Festus lines and turn on 104.1.
Yeah, but that was radio, and podcast and radio you have to listen to live for the most part.
But that's how it was, a few years ago, and you guys were talking different. You guys were already podcasting, and I was like 15, at the time, so I was listening to the radio more and just hearing what everyone was saying and stuff. So taking it in.
And I am a fan of radio. As much as I love music, I love talk.
Right.
Right. I am entertained by talk. I enjoy a good book. We were talking before we went on air. We were talking about a couple good books. But even audio books for me is like, I love something that stimulates my mind in a talk. As much as I like the creative stuff, the music, heavily a music fan. I know all three of us are.
For sure.
Just hearing somebody talk and trying to elevate your thinking and entertain,
And that's why I talk about Joe so much. That's why I'm so appreciative of Joe. And that's why I started my podcast for a lot of reasons, because, Joe and them, they can laugh and all that. And, they have their takes on stuff and might agree, might disagree. But there's not one episode you're not leaving with really thinking about something and, elaborating to friends on and stuff. And that's why I wanted to have the podcast more and just elaborate on conversation, true feels, and, how stuff comes about and just talk about it more. Because you get people in your own setting, you can go anywhere. Just like with you and, what was your buddy's name? The one you had in the Wellness Investors pod, that was great.
Oh, Ben.
Ben. That was awesome. Just getting on your own setting, him coming in your setting, but telling you guys are great friends and just very homey setting, and just getting to get to you. And that's why I love pods. So it's just that conversation setting in life, like anyone you talk to and run into, like if it's not evolving conversation, I'm just not trying to be about it. I'm not about drunk bar talk. Oh, people are like, oh, let me come on the pod. Like, no, talk to me when you're sober and really come on and we can have that conversation. So
Absolutely.
I'm just that kind of guy.
Here in a little bit, we are going to talk about maybe some personal influence of podcasting. But yeah, I think Joe probably might show up on all three of our lists. I'm not sure. But I mean, definitely when you think podcasting now, it's in everyday vernacular. People know what it is. Your grandparent might know what it is or whatever. But even 10 years ago, I felt like we were some of the first around here. And even then, we supported each other.
Exactly.
And when we're talking about the Rising Tide podcast, we're going to support other podcasts, and hopefully they do the same. We're just trying to build a team of creative individuals.
For sure. What was the moment you two guys, when did you guys know you wanted to do the podcast? Like a podcast.
The old one, or
Yeah, whatever you guys started.
The initial one for me was kind of becoming a fad. Those people who had like sports talk shows and stuff, they would break off and actually have, let's say, a 30-minute pod where they would discuss, something that wasn't on the show specifically. So like there was like a PTI edition, pardon the interruption, of podcast, Rich Eisen.
Right.
So that was kind of like the sports stuff that opened up the door to me. But then I realized, there's bands and there's labels doing this and so on and so forth. So I was like, hey, I could, have a podcast and talk about these things. But I'd never really had anybody like I trusted to go on that journey with at the time. So I started a blog, actually, and blogs were kind of a thing in the late 2000s,
So you were typing?
Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah. So I started a traditional blog spot, and honestly, that kind of became more time consuming than having a podcast. And then about that time, Chad actually started up their podcast, the Chris Sabo Power Hour. And I was like, these guys can do it. I'm sure that we can figure it out as well. And it kind of inspired me to get on, getting together a podcast.
I'm sure you saw the roundtable in us, like how we were starting that. Like, that's what I was telling Chad and them. And, me and Chad had our pod, and when he hopped on, and I think it was like just a couple of days later, I think we just kind of got that vibe. Like, we just want to we ain't going to have one podcast, but like I told Chad, like, we just always got to be guns blazing. Like,
right.
And like, and Chad's very good about it. Like, he has kids and stuff that I don't have. So he's good about, finding the balance and stuff. But when it comes to the podcast and stuff,
am I?
Puts it all. You are.
It doesn't feel like it, but
What do you mean?
I just feel
like
we're doing everything I want to do.
For sure. I mean, you're a dad, though, So we're all getting there, and the matter of balancing things out, I definitely get where you're coming from and just taking different aspect and adult approach on things. So where'd you start, Chad?
Like the very beginning, like 10 years ago?
Like Chris Sabo, yeah.
So I did enjoy some podcasts. I think Corolla was around back then.
Yeah, he was.
I haven't heard of it.
One of the things I really enjoyed and just a comedic influence on me since I was a teenager was Tom Green. Do you know Tom Green with Freddie Got Fingered and
Absolutely.
Road Trip? He eats the mice or whatever on Road Trip. You don't know Tom Green? Damn.
The skinny dude?
Canadian.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And he's with the big old black girl?
Maybe. That sounds like him.
He's like skinny, long nose?
I don't know. I'm going to send you some Tom Green.
All right.
No, you're thinking Pete Davidson, I think.
But Tom Green was doing, I think it was called like the Podcastle or something. Him and Kevin Smith, I think, were on each other's or whatever. So that was kind of sort of my first introduction was Corolla, I'm sure, doing podcasts. And we have a buddy who's funny as can be. Yeah, that's him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know him.
We have a buddy that's funny as can be, and we were drunk one night and going home, and we're like, man, you should do stand-up comedy. You're so funny. Why don't you do stand-up comedy? And he's like, all right, I'm going to do it. Well, never did it.
Chuck, right?
Chuck.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, we got to get that creative. We got to get, people need to know, all our buddies know that he's hilarious, but if you're not really around him or you don't run into him, people don't know. I'm like, man, we should just start a podcast. The other guy that we had, Dwayne, who's still a part of a lot of what we do, had a radio background. And between those two, I was like, I'll just sit in the background and not do nothing and let these guys make the money or whatever.
Right.
There wasn't no money, but that was sort of the idea is we wanted to kind of get Chuck's comedy career going or at least doing some sets. And then it just turned into fun.
Right.
We had fun. And what they didn't have, I kind of had is I could, get them on schedule and get them somewhat serious and do segments and topics and stuff. And what they could do, I couldn't do. So, we just started having fun and people started liking it. At first our friends, and then it kind of expanded to some other people liking it, which was even cooler. And then from there, we just had fun.
It's crazy. We all had like that first kind of like team aspect or like, but trial of a podcast.
Right.
That second try, we figured out like we got what we going within our podcast and as a team now. So it's dope to see.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I'm a team guy, so I like to see everybody succeed. I'm kind of like you, Barrett, is that for a lot of years, and I think it especially has to do with fatherhood, which we're both fathers.
Yeah.
DJ's not yet that we know of, right? Like,
No, I ain't no dad.
Not that he's aware of.
No,
Right?
don't wish that on me. Blessings, but I ain't trying to be no dad soon. I got a lot to see.
But I definitely had a creative element for a long time, and I sort of didn't even realize that I had that void in my life and how important it really is
Yeah,
to me and
absolutely.
even my own mental state.
Exactly.
I need to have that creative outlet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what started all this up back again. Was there a little bit of void? I'm like, man, let's do something. And then we got a spot that's pretty killer. So I was like, let's do something. We started doing it.
Yeah, because there's not much to do around here, and this it kills that downtime.
For sure.
Sure.
And the mental health aspect of it too is huge for me.
Yes, me too.
It really is. I have to have that serotonin dump, and my wife and kids, that's wonderful, but that's a different part of me as well. It's like all the pieces of the pie make the whole, and I've got to channel my energy sometimes into like positive things specifically and not negative things. So kind of the podcast is, the outlet for that often. When I played music, I played aggressive, heavy music for the most part, so that was kind of like channeling some anxieties and anger in that way. So, you're kind of wearing multiple hats.
Absolutely. And I feel like mental health comes up on a lot. We run several different podcasts with several different themes and topics. Mental health comes up a lot. And it's something that we're advocates for and passionate about. So, I'm glad that we get to mention that as this is a part of that creative outlet.
I think I can piggyback off what you just said there because, I'm not a dad. So as I get a lot of alone time in my apartment and stuff and within myself and, I get to do a lot of things within myself. I talk to myself a lot, the mental aspect. So when I have a podcast, I kind of make sure that I swing a few mental health questions in with my guests. So I'm always getting something different from a different face, and no one answers the same ever. So I just love that aspect of how the world is collectively different.
Yeah. And it's weird when you have different people in, everybody's perspective is different, but in a way it's like everybody's story is interesting and we're all tied together. I don't know.
It's all aligned. You know what I mean? Everyone you're communicating with and bringing in to your own world within your own guys, with guests on the podcast and all that, it's all aligned to the right things in life. So I just feel like I'm glad we're here with the Rising Tide for sure.
This is episode 1 of the Rising Tide. We're off to a good start, I feel like.
Yeah, what's our slogan?
Our slogan is we're going to ride those tides. I don't know. We do have a logo.
Catch a wave, brah.
We do have a logo. Thanks to Barrett for that.
Yeah,
for
sure.
sure.
Did you draw them?
No, I do some digital rendering of. I usually find other people's base work to inspire me, and then I just kind of put my own spin on it usually.
So it's yours, right?
It is not mine,
But-
technically, but yes, it is mine.
I get what you're saying.
It is, but it isn't. How's that sound?
It's ours.
It's ours. Wink, wink.
We don't need any more legal trouble, copyright issues. This is the Rising Tide. This is episode 1. This episode, like others, brought to you by Liquid Death, and we're going to hear ATI podcast promo right now. And it's going to promo your show and tell the listeners, if you haven't heard it before, a little bit about what you and Josh do.
Yes, sir.
And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing here and kind of get into why we do this. We've sort of mentioned it already, but a little bit deeper dive in it.
And if you want the Liquid Death, hit the link below. Quit messaging me. Just hit the link. It's that easy. If you're listening and you see me on the stories drinking a Liquid Death, just scroll down, hit a like, subscribe, share, and go ahead and get the Liquid Death while you're at it.
Murder your thirst, man. You got to murder that thirst.
Murder your thirst, yeah. All right, we'll be back after this.
This is Barrett from the ATI podcast. Each week, Josh and I discuss current events, pop culture, music, TV, movies, politics, sports. Nothing is out of bounds. You can also tune in to learn about rising artists, small businesses, whether it's music, graphic design, filmmaking, or even a brick and mortar mom and pop shop. We will be spotlighting folks and their endeavors. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Anchor, or anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Just search ATI Podcast. We would like to thank you for your continued support, and as always, please stay safe out there.
Hey, this is Chad from The Barn, and this video is brought to you by Reynolds Landscaping and Lawn Care. Contact Shane Reynolds at 573-516-2387 today for a free bid and to schedule your projects. Retaining walls, paving stone patios and walkways, fire pits, mulch, rock, flower beds, install drains, cutting yards, and more. Contact Shane Reynolds at Reynolds Landscaping and Lawn Care at 573-516-2387 for a free bid and to schedule your projects. Welcome to episode 1 of our new podcast. So can we talk about Joe for a minute?
Yeah, for sure. I figured Joe would probably get brought up in this.
So Joe is an influence on me for sure. And I actually like him more as a UFC commentator and all his UFC stuff than I do as a podcaster. But I love a lot of the ideas about Joe. One, he's free form, which he just turns the mic on and they go. And I'm sure that's difficult. And I like that he's not scared to have people on that people really don't know about, you know, like these obscure people that you learn about, you know, when they come on the air and talk about anything. So there's aspects to his show that I love. Now, for me, he's a little douchey sometimes.
Absolutely.
And I have to kind of tune some of that out. He comes off as a know-it-all all the time, you know, but in the same regard, I do think he's smart, and I respect his thirst for knowledge, it seems like. So, yeah. So as much as Joe is an influence, there's some things that I don't love about what he does.
What do you love about Joe?
What I do like about him is he will talk to anybody. So you already kind of started with that point. So I'll give some examples. So whenever Andrew Yang was running for president, he was a really obscure, low-level person in the Democratic running of the party, but he gave him just as much time as anybody else on his show. And then within weeks after that, he had Josh Homme for Queens of the Stone Age and Caius on his show. You know, so that just kind of tells you the variety right there. And then perhaps he would talk to Maynard the next week, you know, from Tool and so on and so forth. Or he'd bring in a UFC fighter, he'd bring in one of his comedy buddies. He's had Chappelle on there several times. So I like that aspect where he just brings people from all walks of life into his show and have a discussion. We try to do that on our show. So I'd say that that's my biggest and most major influence from Rogan in particular.
For sure. I would say my love of Joe is like, my first eyes on Joe was Fear Factor, you know? Yeah. He was skinny. His hairline was V-ing and all that. That was the first time I saw him. And, you know, just growing through life is just a lot of deja vu. And I was seeing him, and when I started watching UFC, you know, my buddy G-Hop, you know, I was just hearing his voice, and he was always watching Joe Rogan, and I wasn't even putting 2 and 2 together, you know. I kept hearing that voice. I was like, and I just asked him one day, I was like, hey, is that guy on the UFC, is this his podcast? He was like, yeah, man, you didn't know that? I was like, that's crazy. He does like that much, you know. And what he was talking about on his pod would make him just, you know, the things he believes in and intakes and all his self-practices and all that. And I just, you know, being a young black man in an area like this, I feel like I could relate to that, you know, an eye on you and just not even giving a fuck, but just doing you no matter what the stipulations are. And just when you do that, like, people just respect you more, you know, because you never change. And I've always seen that about Joe. Like, no matter what it is, he's stayed him. And, you know, even being, he might know it all and all that, you know, we might not know it all in that aspect of some conversations, but I just always respected his same take on things and just his walk of life. He's never really changed. I mean, his grind is 100.
He's got a grind. Yeah, you got to give him that.
He's got over like 4,000 podcasts.
He puts them out, man.
For 3 hours, he talks to everybody. Yeah. How do you even do that?
I don't understand it.
That I don't know, and I respect the hell out of him for that.
Yes.
Just a little bit that we do. Man, I couldn't imagine how much content and how many hours he's had behind the mic, and to be able to keep it refreshing and fresh would be difficult.
And you have to think he has to keep that kind of compartmentalized in the sense that he's also a stand-up, so he doesn't want to burn his material on a show. You know,
I haven't seen him as a point.
That's a lot of mic time.
I haven't seen him as a stand-up to where, like, and I can't judge him, but I love him so much on the pod. I don't want to see him as a comedian because I might think he's corny.
I'm not a huge fan of his stand-up. I like, you know, some of the people he's surrounded himself with.
That's probably where he tries to get that. That's probably where he tries to get that shit off he can't say on the podcast.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he has podcasting, UFC, and stand-up.
Right.
That's a lot to juggle, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know,
and I don't recall all the timelines, but of course you mentioned earlier he had like Fear Factor. He's done other stuff too that he's been beholden to. So and then even when he started out in UFC, he was kind of more of a ringside commentator or an interviewer, and then now he's done the commentary. So that time behind the mic is also lengthened in those projects that he's been involved in over time.
You were talking about Theo Von. I love him too because some of his visual works on YouTube is like how I not try to get, but like just like that's creative, like his colors and his art and just his conversations too. Why is he not with Brendan Schaub no more?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, they were great together as a podcast, and that's where I started. So
Theo Von is so damn funny.
dude, he is like
so quick. I like that he talks about his mental health and like struggles on there too. He's really transparent. It seems like he entertains me, man. And I could watch him talk about a little bit of everything, whatever it is.
Theo's great.
So I was surprised to see him pop up on Bill Maher. I think it was last season.
Okay,
on,
I didn't see that.
On his show Real Talk. Yeah, he was one of his guest commentators whenever he brings on guests and stuff. I was kind of aware of him. I'd seen some of his bits and stuff before, but I didn't realize, until recently that he had his own show as well. But that's another interesting thing is there's so many comedians that have their own podcasts now too. And they have different avenues at which they kind of approach things. Like I'm a Bill Burr guy.
Oh, yeah.
Really into Bill Burr.
Oh, yeah.
And Mark Maron as well. So Mark Maron's podcast is one of the best ones out there, I believe, as well. Yep. And he's always talking about his mental health too.
I think the more the guys sit around the table and have these conversations about mental health, the more it's going to be more acceptable in society to say, hey, we're not tough badasses all the time. We need some help. And it's a realization that we have to come to too, or at least me. I can't talk for you guys that I want to just carry the weight of the world on my shoulder. Dude, that doesn't work. That's not a healthy way to live your life. You're destined for failure. So anytime mental health comes up on this or any of the podcasts I'm involved in, I always cheer in a way because I'm an advocate for that. So I love the guys that are transparent enough to talk about because I think it can help people.
Well, it's just relieving, like me and McVeigh talked about on my pod. Like
McVeigh's in the house, by the way, Antoine.
Hey.
We're too old and, life's too short and all that to be bottling things up. We got to talk more and check in. Like Matt was saying earlier about, I keep forgetting your Ben. You were saying about Ben. We just got to check in more in the aspect of
homie check
every day,
If you haven't heard it, what DJ is talking about is a podcast that we did with the wellness investors with a good friend of mine, Ben Leffridge, and he talks about his sobriety. He talks about his struggle, and he talks about his sobriety. And if you haven't heard that yet, we'll attach that video at the end of this one because I think it's an important message. It's also my favorite thing that I've done so far since we've been doing the podcast thing.
If you guys struggle with that with anybody, it's just great to go listen to that.
And I think, there's some things that I really am not interested in talking about on mic. I am a big politic guy.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's not really something I'm going to get into, not for any other reason than I just don't want to, I don't think. Not that I'm afraid to piss anybody off or make anybody mad. It's just not what I'm into, at least enough to share to people. You guys do, though, right?
Yeah, we do. We pretty frequently. We try to do current events. Not necessarily every episode, but especially if there's a void in time, perhaps, current events is always good material to pick from.
Sure.
Whether it's you just want to do kind of a passerby bullet points on something, like we did a sports segment a while back where we just kind of hit on NFL free agency, that sort of stuff. But we went long form, if there's an interesting thing going on. So right as soon as the war with Russia and Ukraine kicked off, we were really trying to look for like reasons beyond. So there was a lot of information getting shared about all the natural resources that came out of Ukraine in particular. So we did a deep dive on that. We did commentary on State of the Union and things of that nature because we want to bring a perspective to. I feel like there's a lot of people out there that don't know or realize that they're not a cookie cutter Democrat or Republican. They have views outside of those national agendas. And I don't think that it's good to be a yes man to vote straight ticket, regardless of what your political beliefs are or affiliations. In that regard, you should always be choosing the right person for the job, if you will. So we try to address it from a literal standpoint, topically, who's doing a good job, who's not doing a good job. But then we also kind of reveal what our motivations are politically at times as well. But it's not the main focus, but we're political guys. We like to infuse it.
And I've listened to your stuff. I think I definitely heard the January 6th piece.
Yeah.
And I think what I took away from it more than anything is you guys commentating on the response to other people's reaction to politics, less than the politics itself, sort of the sociology of everything, which I really enjoyed. And like I said, just because we don't talk about it here, I like that you guys are doing that because you're covering an area that we might not. So I want to promote that. We're going to have another guy on. Danny King is doing one. He's doing a movie podcast.
Yeah.
DJ watches a lot of movies, but I have 3 kids, so I don't watch as many as I would like.
Yeah.
But they're covering an area that I like movies, but I wouldn't say it's my first passion.
When is this?
What are you talking about?
Danny King.
Danny King's going to come on Rising Tide.
Oh, bet. All right.
He has a podcast out of Bon Terre.
Okay, cool.
He does have a Birdman, I think, right?
It's about movies.
I listen to that occasionally, Brandon.
Yeah, and we're gonna attach Danny's podcast, 2 Movies podcast, to our next commercial break, so you can get some more information on it. But they watch I think a shitty movie, and he's invited me to come on, and I've already picked out the movies I'm pretty stoked about.
Hell yeah!
I'm not telling you, but they watch one shitty movie and one I think popular or good reviewed movie, I guess, and sort of compare the two. And usually there's a theme there. You know, sports movies or whatever.
Like he did like Captain America and Toxic Avenger on one occasion. It is pretty hilarious. Or he'll do 2 horror movies or whatever the case is.
See, I don't have the time to watch a bad movie. I feel like that's just wasted life.
I'm starting to get that way for sure. Like I almost get pissed off after I watch a bad movie. Like, what? I just wasted 90 minutes of my life.
Yes.
I 100% agree with that. I value my time, man.
dude.
You know, one way or the other.
I want everything to be fire.
I've gotten way more elitist with my movies. Like I almost stick to directors or genres. Like I'm like A24 puts out fantastic movies.
Yes. Coen Brothers, like old school, you know, all that stuff.
And I'm like really into like Jordan Peele's one of my favorite directors, Robert Eggers. Midsummer, Ari Aster. That's one of the best movies I've seen in forever. Hereditary. So like, again, it kind of goes in that creative thing. Like, if I had the time, I'd like to be a filmmaker too. But, you know, it's like you have to kind of pick your lane with things you're familiar with.
It's so crazy how I feel like the movie day has like flipped the script. Like The Matrix was way before its time. Okay. So you get all these movies like back in the day, Lord of the Rings, the Avengers, where it started at Iron Man 1. Like that was fire. I just feel like the camera work back then was not great. The storyline was so fire. Now we got the fire camera and like half the good story. I just feel like it's all backwards. We just don't have all the movies that were great back then. There's not a lot of great movies like that today.
I definitely feel like it's watered down, but I don't watch as much as you guys probably do. It feels like I don't see as many good things that often as I used to. Well, and maybe it's because I don't have enough data points, because I don't watch a whole lot of movies, but it doesn't seem like you get the same content anyway to me.
The movie piece actually kind of ties back in with podcasts too, in the sense that as technology has advanced, like things like oversaturation in the market, for example. So like you can see any movie anytime you want at any point in the day for any length of time that you are able to watch a movie nowadays.
Same with music.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
Music too. So the streaming services that are out now, advances in technology, like I mentioned, like, you can have a MacBook and you can do literally everything on your MacBook nowadays. You can put a beat together and you can rap and you can upload it. And, somebody like Post Malone, for example, like he did everything essentially on his own and got famous off of a SoundCloud.
Right.
SoundCloud, baby.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's even kind of like outdated nowadays.
Yep.
People don't really use that anymore, but again, these advancements in technologies have affected every field, and podcasts in particular.
I feel like COVID sped us up 5 years because then you get the more work from homes.
Right.
We don't have to be everywhere present in the moment anymore because we can be present remotely. But a lot of those things, the creativity. We had Andrew Ryan on, who's from Deloge, old school Deloge, and he tours and plays music. And, he goes and records bands and artists like at their place and then ship, he'll need a fiddle part or whatever, and he'll ship files back and forth. It's just the technology has sped everything up.
Yeah.
And I'm on board, man. I'm an old, I feel like an old grandpa at this point.
Yeah.
But I appreciate technology and that people like Elon Musk exist and they're trying to advance us as humans.
We need them.
Yeah, for sure.
We need them.
I mean, it's gotten so much easier nowadays, obviously, too. You and I share stuff back and forth, Chad.
Very
often and very easily.
Yes.
No issue. And even if there's like a marginal issue, like I'll let you know in like 5-10 minutes it's resolved, and we're sharing stuff back and forth. And I know back in the day I was going to ask you about influences, because the old Chris Sabo show, to me, it always had an element of Howard Stern to it.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the jocularity that took place there, And I was always a huge Howard Stern fan. My dad raised me on Howard Stern in the 90s. We would listen to the radio show whenever he went to XM. He bought a subscription. We had it, we listened to Howard for 15 years probably at least. And I felt like your show kind of was inspired by it, maybe not indirectly, but it definitely played out like that. And that's why I always enjoyed your show back in the day. And that was always, talk radio. Obviously, in our time, there wasn't podcasts way back when as well. But talk radio, obviously, has kind of transformed it over into the podcast business as well. So I'd say Howard's an influence for me, even though, I don't have the Wack Pack on my show or anything like that.
Not only was it inspired by, but on my part, and Dwayne just stepped in too, the old Chris Sabo Power Hour host over there.
My old buddy.
Yeah.
No reason why that's what really brought the fans in.
Which he did have a radio background, but you bring Howard Stern up, man. And, it's sort of my idea. And I talked to it might have been Chuck. I was like, hey, you want to start a podcast? And he goes, what the fuck's a podcast?
Yeah.
And I go, I don't know, but let's try it. But it was that. It was because we wanted to do a comedy thing with Chuck, but it was not only inspired by Howard Stern. I mean, we ripped complete bits off.
Yeah.
Just because I think we all were, but like me and Chuck for many years were obsessed with Howard. As soon as we're in the St. Louis area, as soon as he came to, and even before that, because he had the E show,
right,
the late at night E show where you'd see a girl in a
Watered
bikini
down.
or something.
Yeah.
From the moment he came on my radar, and still am a fan-ish, not as dedicated as I used to be.
Same.
But definitely inspired by Howard Stern. Any last influences before we get to a break?
I was really inspired by the Breakfast Club, man. They just had a lot on me, like Charlamagne the God, just being real, being funny and knowing when he's wrong. I love the Breakfast Club. My dad was just turning it on every morning, and I didn't know what I was listening to, but it was funny. And when they had them random callers call in, that is the best, What's up, Charlamagne the God? All that, I just love that stuff,
Donkey of the day.
Yeah. Donkey of the Day now is the greatest. So he just has the random takes, and Breakfast Club is great to me.
To me, it's the interaction between definitely the 2 and sometimes 3 and sometimes 4.
For sure.
Who they have on
Right.
is a lot of what interests me. But the interaction and the sort of definitely different mindsets and personalities between those two.
Yes. And they have a female too, so it's dope.
There's a couple other ones. I think, Chad, you're probably leaving. I mean, again, this wasn't exactly a podcast, but he has a podcast now, Jon Stewart. So kind of like the political satire people as well is a huge influence on me, I feel like. But John's got his own show now as well.
David Letterman for me,
Yes,
TV.
absolutely.
I was a huge David Letterman. I cried when he.
Me too.
I cried when he left, and he was huge for me as an interviewer, and his humor, was dry, and sometimes you didn't know if you were a part of the joke or the joke or
Exactly.
laughing at the joke.
His Netflix show's phenomenal as well. Really.
And where I have kind of fell off with Howard had this, man, like 5 or 6 year run for me anyway, where he was just absolutely on fire.
Yeah.
And his radio show was too. A lot of people complain about it now, and I do too, where he's kind of at now, but he's 60 years old. He can't still be doing some of the stuff they used to do.
Yeah.
So he's matured, but his interviews are still spot on. Anytime he has somebody on, he knows when to talk, when not, when to push, when not to. He's just a master at that.
Yeah, he would be my top person as far if I was to choose anybody to interview anyone, it'd probably be Howard Stern. I always enjoy his he had a very fascinating interview with Hillary Clinton because he actually humanized her and she doesn't usually come off very human.
I listened to that and I feel the same way. She came off very likable.
Yeah. Where the hell is this, whenever you're running for president?
She should have went on there.
Exactly.
And he extended the invite.
Right.
For her to come on and say, hey, but I don't know. I think she thought it.
She felt
had
intimidated
it
by it too.
And maybe that, yeah.
And she felt intimidated by being on the show. She said that on that podcast as well.
Dan Rather's another one. I know we're getting a little old school here, but Dan Rather, always somebody I idolize. That the interview art form and the and I know media and news has turned into something complete. It's kind of turned into something, but he was a traditional, newsman, what I consider a newsman. So as far as interviews go, I think he's up there too for me.
Well, here's another curveball for interviews too. James Lipton inside the Actors Studio. It was wild how randomly fascinating he could be with guests. Like his Chappelle one is amazing. His episode with Chappelle. So I always enjoyed. I think it was on the Bravo channel back in the day.
There were times you didn't know if James Lipton was like breathing.
I know.
Just so like just
Stoic.
sitting there. Yeah. Yeah. Like I thought he was like dead. Like somebody embalmed him or something. Like
you guys is familiar with Narwhal? Narwhal's probably he's another big influence. How when he'd get with the big artists, he would know all this stuff and all that. If I was going to interview someone that big, I would probably have to know all my stuff too. So Narwhal was just really smart and he was funny too himself.
And for some of the music stuff that I'm involved in with the podcast stuff, they've been asked the same question 100 times. Who do you listening to? Or, you
Right.
know, who's your inspiration? You know, I do like that element of it, is try to let the who you're interviewing know that, hey, I know what's going on. Like, I'm aware of you. I'm not just asking you the same,
Right.
run down my list of the same questions.
Right.
What year were you born? When did you graduate high school? You know, this.
But seeing him and seeing their responses, like, how do you know my high school band name was this and this and this?
Yeah, they're really freaked out. Yeah, it's just funny.
Sean Evans is like that with Hot Ones. I don't know if you ever watched Hot
Oh
Ones.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Hot Ones is awesome.
Almost every person he ever interviews is like, this is like one of the best interviews I've ever had.
Yeah.
If not
A lot
the
of
best.
people say that when they're on Howard too. They'll close out and be doing their goodbyes or whatever, and they'll mention that. So okay, those are our influences. When we come back, we're getting into the nitty gritty, the logistics of running a podcast. If you have a podcast, good for you. Maybe you learned something, or maybe you could teach us something. And if you're wanting to start one, I say do that shit, man. Half the people I talk to, they're like, where'd we get with this podcast thing? It's like, we just put the mics on and just started. So if you're thinking about starting one, we're going to get you there. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the logistics of podcasting. You guys good with that?
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good,
Be
man.
back after this.
News. Good evening. My name is Trick Stevens. I'm sorry to interrupt your program. We've just had an exciting discovery, and we're going to take it now to one of our broadcasters in the field, Flemphalic?
Flemphalic. Thanks. Hi, I'm here with Dr. Les Buns. I'm not
Actually, I'm an aspiring doctor. But yes, very excited to be here.
I'm here with aspiring Dr. Les Buns, who's really excited to talk about a new discovery in the scientific field.
Yes, it's very exciting. We recently discovered that a shortage of a chemical called IJ2M in the frontal lobe can cause, depression and poopy pants and foamy diarrhea and yelling at people in the service industry and just doing all around super shitty things. But we've manufactured a new chemical called It's Just Two Movies, which is it's like a pill, but you break it in half and put it in your ears, I guess. I don't know. We're making this up.
So what is It's Just Two Movies exactly?
Well, actually, it's a podcast.
What's a podcast?
Nobody knows, but it's an audio thing that you listen to and have a great time.
That sounds fantastic.
The great thing that makes It's Just Two Movies work is the dual action capsules. When you break them, one has a good movie and the other one has a bad movie, which releases endorphins, which alleviates the shortage of IJ2M in the frontal lobe.
That is fascinating. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the endorphins are released periodically.
I think so.
Probably every Monday or so.
Yeah, every Monday, new dosages.
How can people access this exciting new discovery? And is it covered by insurance?
Absolutely not. But lucky for you, it's free, or $5 if you get it on the street. You can get it at any select pharmacies like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rhapsody, iTunes, Receipt VS, and Ballgreens. Brought to you by Ballgreens. When you're here, it's ballin'.
For Channel Zero News, I'm Flemphalic. Back to you in the studios.
All right, and that's going to do it for our special news alert. Back to your regularly scheduled programming.
And my heart is full of pain. I'm 1,000 miles away from home, just waiting for a train.
Now exclusively on YouTube, The Barn presents Birds and Swords.
Be sure to tune in to hear Micah and Alyssa and special guests discuss any and everything gaming. Please like, subscribe, share, follow the Facebook group for updates and more.
Welcome back to the first episode of Rising Tide Podcast. Is it hard to run and start a podcast? Yes, no.
Yes and no.
Yeah, yes and no.
It depends on your agenda.
Yeah, I was going to say it depends on your drive.
What are you trying to achieve with your podcast? Is this just something that you're fleshing out, just to have something to do, or do you want people to hear it? How do you want people to hear it? Do you want a visual component? Do you not? So there's a lot of decisions that go into that naturally.
That, or if you just love to talk and you really don't, you have a voice and don't know what to do with it and just trying to start something, YouTube's the base nowadays to create. Everyone's doing it. Just, do you.
For me, at least the most part is you have to be willing to talk about something or be passionate about something.
Right.
For sure.
And be willing to share that part of yourself. There's sometimes when we get in here, we're talking about with the Ben Sobriety Wellness Investors one that we did.
Right.
Like, I think when we were done with that interview, like I was tired, like physically tired.
Sure.
Because
Emotionally taxing.
emotionally, yeah, you emotionally get involved in some of the things you're talking about. Maybe you are emotional about some of the things you're talking about, but having that desire to talk about something and be passionate about it, I think you have to have that first and foremost, right? You have to have something to say.
Yeah, 100%.
I had that exact situation here a few weeks ago. We did our tribute to my old co-host, Cato.
Yes,
on
listen
our
to that.
show.
Good stuff, by the way.
And it was, it was difficult preparing the materials. Once I prepared the materials, we sat down to do it. It was a labor of love. And then I kind of broke down a little bit at the very end of it. Finally, it was just like kind of all hit me again when I was sharing a story about, introducing my newborn daughter to Cato, because I have a memorial for him at my house. And, so that just kind of speaks to your point a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I listened to that one and we were kind of texting back and forth during that time. And I was like, man, I think I said, I'm proud of you for even talking about that, because I've experienced in my life that just feels like this weight on me that I carry around every single day. But actually, by talking about it a lot more than I have in many years,
Right.
It's been sort of healing for me too. So when you said you were doing that, I was like, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, there was definitely immediate relief, I felt like. And I felt like, kind of the agenda was, A, I wanted to, one of my mentors, I wanted to pay homage. And B, I wanted to give him a send-off that I felt was proper as well. Regardless of whether or not it was my business to do it, I just had this internal instinctual drive that I needed to do it.
I thought it was great. And DJ, we've talked about the grief process a little bit on here too.
Yeah.
And with the podcasting, I think it can be healing, and it definitely is for me anyway.
It is healing. Not even like, not even ways that like you're trying to get a guest on and grieve to them, but like you just start to like really dig deeper when, are grieving. And I just feel like the grind just more there.
And it's a part of your story.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be like me coming on here and not talking about my daughters. Like, that's a huge part of me. Why wouldn't I talk about it?
For sure.
But you have to put yourself out there emotionally sometimes when you're releasing things and people might hear it.
Well, that's a conversation me and my co-host Josh, who did it with us back in the day as well. We kind of had to talk. Do we want to talk about our families on the show? Because today too, you have to be protective of everybody, because anybody and anybody can get to you.
Sure.
And the people that you love.
And that's a good point, because I make it a point to never say my daughter's name on here.
Yeah.
I try to keep that out. I'll say my daughter or my oldest daughter.
Yeah.
I don't want that out there. And maybe they don't want that out there,
Sure, that's a fair point.
Try to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
That you might say something or tell a story about somebody. I try to keep it vague in case they don't want that information out there.
Yeah, and like from a freeform podcast, like I'm a guy, like I got to make sure I'll know if I know something about somebody, I'd be like, hey, do we want to talk about this or not? And, some people are cool and a lot of people are very, like, what are we going to talk about? They don't really believe in you as a host, Sometimes that's taxing too, and you lose the aspect of a podcast, but I love them freeform, real talk podcasts.
So I had an interesting situation I want to run by you guys real quick. I had a guest on that said some things that I think were pretty controversial. And even though he said it himself and I didn't pry to get that information out,
right.
I think if I would have posted it, I think it might have cost a little bit of trouble. As much as I loved what he said, I decided to cut it.
Right.
And that was tough for me, because I knew if I posted it, it would probably get some more attention. So there was a little bit of an ethical thing there.
Yeah.
And I ran it by him. I'm like, hey, man, this is, I don't know if you remember or not, but this is what you said.
Yeah.
And he's like, do what you want with it. So he kind of put it out there. But I was like, man, I've been working with your manager and I want to work with your manager more. So let's cut it out. But that was difficult for me.
Yeah. I had a similar instance with our mutual friend, Brandon Stewart. And he was on the podcast. We were featuring some of his stuff, and he had made some mentions and jokes, and he won't mind me saying it because it's out there. It's our audio out there in the podcast ways, if you will.
And you want to talk about mutual friends. I love that kid. Oh my, I call him a kid because I remember him as a younger guy.
Yeah.
I love Brandon. Yeah.
He's done really well for himself in the military, but his dad unfortunately took his life not too long ago, and he made a joke about shooting yourself in the head, quite frankly. To be direct, he made some jokes about it, and I fell into your situation. Well, there's not context here yet, So I don't feel it's appropriate to make those jokes quite yet until people understand, because he didn't fully disclose what happened with his father.
Okay.
But then he did on the following episode.
So the timeline was a little messed
Yeah,
up.
it was a little wonky to be making that joke, and then people knew that we were going to have a podcast about that subject matter. And then he decided to share his personal story with suicide on the podcast as well. So then it gave it more context, and then it made it kind of, I don't know, everybody's got a different opinion, mind you, this day and age, but it became appropriate at that point, I guess, to have all that.
I do put comedy in a different way, man. We've talked about cancel culture on here before.
It's just a matter. It's not even comedy. Like, you just got to know when and not when not. You know, the respect's lost nowadays. It's just so. It's not even lost. Just people just
Time,
are
place, and manner.
that, and just people are just so in their own lane stubbornly. Sometimes, you know.
But I love the win nots. They're
Oh, me
hilarious to me. I love the jokes at the funerals.
Yeah, it's just like you getting back into the influences. Like, my favorite comedians are Bill Hicks, George Carlin. You know, those guys, they wouldn't even make it today. And even George Carlin started to get very controversial in his time. You know, even Lenny Bruce, he's controversial, you know, like his material.
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy in his heyday, Richard Pryor.
Yes.
You know, the best comedians, Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's getting roasted right now.
Yeah.
You know, and all he's doing is leading into the narrative that people are making about him and making jokes about
Yeah,
it.
he loves it. I love it.
Yeah.
That's all he's doing. You know, he's not saying he's this person, but he's making jokes about people enforcing this ideology on him.
Man, I always just put humor on a pedestal. For me,
Right.
I understand the need for cancel culture in some regard. There were some places we weren't fully yet as a society, and I felt like we had to swing the needle so far the other way to kind of find our medium. But man, when it comes to comedy, I put it on a pedestal. Comedy to me, I think everything's a joke, and everything's funny. If somebody's going to laugh at it, it's funny. But I also understand that some things can offend people too.
Sure.
Know your audience, but it's impossible to always know your audience.
This is episode 1 of Rising Tide Podcast. We thank Barrett for joining. You gotta get all of us. All Things
ATI.
Insane podcast, but ATI podcast is what I call it.
Yeah.
It's on.
As far as places that you can find us audio-wise, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Stitcher, we're on Spotify, we are on Google Podcasts, we are on Anchor. Anywhere you get your podcast audio content, you can find us. You can follow us on social media. We've got Instagram, we're pretty active on there, the ATI Podcast, Twitter at podcast_ATI. We've got Facebook /ATI Podcast 22. And we're starting to work on our TikTok, YouTube's, Twitch, and SoundCloud accounts a little bit. We've got accounts there. Just search ATI Podcast. You can follow us.
And then if you're listening to this, you better be listening to my boy DJ's podcast, Swerving Podcast.
Swerving Podcast. Yeah. We had Deegan on, the barber, local barber. Make sure you hit him up for a cut. Make sure you get him too, Chad.
I want to get a barber chair in
Yeah,
here.
I got to check that episode out. I've been checking your stuff out.
He's
I've been
nice.
enjoying it.
Just knowing how he came up and stuff. And Swerving Podcast, Knuckleball Prime Time, ATI Podcast, Girl Dad, Vulgar's up next. Everything, baby. It's Friday night. We're out.
Thanks, Barrett, for joining us.
Thank you,
Check
guys.
us out. You know the barn. We're the big umbrella for all those ones that
yeah.
DJ mentioned. Support what you can. We've talked about it before, but even shares and likes means a lot and it can get other eyes on it. Thanks for joining us, Barrett.
My pleasure, sir.
We're out.
We are